Hello and welcome to today's video, 5 turns a DM should know before they start running a game. So real quick, I've recorded this like 3 or 4 times. Hopefully no issues happen this time. Let me know if the audio and the lighting are all good. They're all different, added to the mistakes I had and couldn't use the other videos, as well as just not having a good couple weeks with some of my health issues. I want to make sure you guys know I'm not going to going into explaining things like con save or spell DC. I believe those things are really easy to figure out reading the rules or playing the game. So I won't be explaining those, but I will be explaining some terms for a new DM that I believe ones I learned while running my first game, while I'm running my first game still. Over the last 10 weeks or so, they have drastically improved the way the game has been played and how I've planned out sessions. The first term I actually knew before I decided to run my own game, as many of my DMs have done it with me, and that's session 0, or the first session of a new campaign. Some people argue you can't have a session 0 for whatever reason, but everyone else can discuss that stuff later. But with this session, you can discuss what everyone expects. Anyone who would like certain things not to come up in the campaign. Or, if the DM expects the game to be heavy roleplay or heavy combat, right? In case the campaign's going to deal with heavy subjects like slavery, and you can have people can express themselves if they're okay or not okay with that, and can decide if this campaign is right for them. And maybe that means that the DM can change their campaign, or that player can decide that this campaign's not okay for them, that they're going to leave at the beginning before you get 5 or 6 sessions into it, and then they need to drop out due to the subject matter of the game, or them not liking the play style that you decided to go with because they wanted a lot of combat, but it was really role play heavy, right? The players get to discuss their characters and perhaps roll stats. It's common for the session not to have anyone playing game, but it could include playing some aspects of the game. Like it could include some of the role playing to kind of get some of the newer players like realizing, oh, this is kind of what some people do voices, some people don't. Or possibly do a little combat session right at the end of session 0 to show how the system works for the new players, and in case you guys have some special homebrew rules that you're throwing in, so that they can get that kind of combat stuff wrapped around in the first game, in this session instead of the first game, so that you guys can kind of jump into it and roll with the game right away instead of trying to learn the rules then. Term 2 is a twofer, RAW, R-A-W and R-A-I. RAW, R-A-W, is rules as written. This is anything official, and anything opposed to it isn't right. RAI, or rules as intended, is to deal with the spirit of the game. This is not the official way of the writing, but it's kind of common sense, kind of like they didn't mean for this to do this, they meant it to do this, right? So let's go a little deeper in this, and we will pull an example up. So this hasn't happened in my game, but looking at Twitter, Reddit, YouTube for examples of RAW and RAI kind of going against each other, I believe that this example is by far the funniest and the easiest way to explain. So let's begin with the lucky feat. Rules as written, or the rules without regard to the designer's intent. The text are forced to stand on its own. The feat says, you have incredible luck that seems to kick in just in the right time. You have 3 luck points. Whenever you make an attack roll, an ability check, or saving throw, you can spend 1 luck point to roll an additional d20. You can choose to spend one of these luck points after you roll the die, but before the outcome is determined. You choose which of the d20s is used for the attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. So if you say, I take an attack with my eyes closed, which RAW says gives you disadvantage, you roll 2d20. And then say, I use a lucky point, you then roll a third d20, and you get to choose any one of the 3 dice you just rolled. And it was confirmed, like that is technically rules as written on May 19th, 2015 on Twitter by one of the game devs. The game dev also explains that in his game, how he rules it is rules as intended, which is the rules are with the context of the designer's intent. This is to make it so that if you think the roll that counts fails, you get to roll a second time and you pick the higher of the 2, right? When I first read this feed, I would always have gone with the RAI version of this because that's just what makes sense in my brain. I would never have thought of closing my eyes to get 3 dice and then picking one of the 3. Right? I would have rolled the 2 with disadvantage, picked the lower one, and then rolled the third. But that's not RAW. And with RAW, you really do get a better shot of hitting a monster with your eyes closed when you have the lucky feat. A little extra thing that the game designer says, in a perfect world, the game designer's intent and the rules would line up perfectly, but that's not always the case. So on to our third term, railroading. Railroading, I think, is pretty self-explanatory for a lot of people. Railroading, though, is when a DM takes the choice away from the player, and that's a big no-no at the table. There is kind of like light railroading, and this is when the DM railroads the players, but no one at the table realizes it, and that's okay. Because no one realizes it, it doesn't really matter. And in some cases, like the players need it. There's moments where your group is lost and they don't know what to do. So having an NPC walk up and say, follow me, yeah, the DM is telling you what to do, but that's also helping the game along. It's also pushing the story forward. It's making the game more enjoyable. So sometimes a little bit of railroading is needed, right? Now, if you give them a choice to go down a path left or right, but it doesn't matter because the encounter you planned, it would be on either one of those paths, I would kind of guess like, okay, that's light railroading. But because that outcome was going to happen no matter what, but there's 2 different cities at the other ends, right? So they get to choose a city, but that one encounter is going to happen no matter what. But let's say they're at that same fort, and you have laid out some breadcrumbs showing that down, down this path, the big bad's in this city, and he's going to wait for you to come, and you're going to fight. And the players don't want to fight yet. They feel like they're not ready, or they want to get some more materials, some more items to beefing up their strength. So they go down the right path. And then you say a storm hits and rock slides happen. Now the road's blocked. You have to go the other way. Then they say, well, we'll start clearing out the paths. And you keep on just throwing little things at them over and over and over, trying to stack more and more stuff in front of them so that they have to turn back because you want them to face that big bad. Eventually you get frustrated enough where you just say, oh, you're ambushed by a whole bunch of bandits. There's so many of them, so you give up and you are now taken prisoner. And at this point, you're railroading them in the worst kinds of way and taking one of the most important things away from the player, which is term number 4, agency. So what is agency? I define agency as the player has control of their own decisions. Those decisions have consequences within the game world, and the player has enough information to anticipate those consequences before making any decision. Now, what does all that mean? To elaborate on those conditions, let's use the example I just used about picking left or right to explain how agency can be violated in a game of D&D. So to violate, number 1, you could say one of your PCs drops his sword and gives up. The DM's taking away a player's choice of the character. 99% of the time, this is a good little tangent, the player will always fight to the death. Never try to force them to, never put them in a situation where you're like, oh, they're going to give up, because they're almost never going to give up. They're going to be like, we can take this, because they're heroes. They're badass people. They're going to fight it. So you got to pay attention. Try not to put your characters in those kind of situations. But that call of them fighting to the death, that goes to the characters, and that goes to them making that choice and being okay. I'm gonna fight these guys until I die. Like, that's their choice. They're okay with it. They'll rather their character die than you continuously pulling this kind of crud on them where you say, oh, you're ambushed and you're captured. Like, it's annoying. You want to have your choice of your character. You want to be able to decide if you're going to fight or give up. Number 2, I like to look at this one like a double standards kind of thing as well. As the world building of your world, you want everything to feel alive. If the player steals from a shop and he gets arrested quite easily due to failure of rolls, but an NPC just walking down the street, stabbing people and pillaging every shop, and gets away with it, the player will feel like there's no real consequences in the world except for the player characters. You want to make sure that they understand that this world has consequences and it goes for everyone. Right? You want to make sure, like, I'll use a NPC to show them there's a consequence for getting in a bar fight here. The bartender's going to jump over the bar and beat the crud out of you if you start a fight in his bar and kick you out. You don't want to do this. So I try to show this kind of stuff up right at front. Like, I'm not showing these things every time they walk into a bar, but like the first time they go to a tavern, I'll show something like, hey, you don't do this. Or if they go out and they do something, I make sure there's a consequence to it. And I try to make sure that it is constant throughout the entire game and throughout at least that town. Because something bad here necessarily isn't bad over here, right? Let's take slavery. Slavery could be okay in this town, but against the law in this town. So, there are things that are different in the world that won't feel broken, but inside that town, you want to make sure that you're consistent with it. Number 3, sticking with like the stealing example. If he rolls perception to see if anyone is around and there's no guards, and then he steals, and then all of a sudden there's a guard behind him, where's the info for that player to correctly know where they came from? How do they know what they can do? How are they going to get this information, right? Can they do this? Can they not do this? If it's obvious, make sure, like, if there's guards walking around, make sure they know that there's guards walking around. You got to make sure that there's a way for them to get the information. Now, if the player is, hey, I would like to look and see if there's any guards around, and he rolls high. Oh, there's none. If he's trying to figure out stuff, you gotta give that information to the player. Those are simple examples, but you can apply these 3 points to almost any situation. At least I believe you can, to see if you're taking the player's agency away from them. Now, is agency always better? Probably not, but it depends on the group. Outside of doing a 100% open world type D&D, there's numerous other good things that might be worth giving up some agency as a player for, like for the story, and the players, like the story you and the players are making. So in the game I'm running right now, it's set in Waterdeep, and the players can decide to leave Waterdeep if they wanted to. They can, but if they do decide that, as a DM, I would tell them, hey, I'll need to wait a couple weeks as I need to prepare outside of Waterdeep stuff. This goes back to Session 0. I kind of laid it out. You guys are in Waterdeep. Your stuff is happening in Waterdeep. And they can always decide to leave, but I'm going to have time because I spent my prepping time in Waterdeep, not on the outside world. Now, when they decide to leave Waterdeep, I tell them that I need a couple weeks. Most of the times the players are going to say, okay, but we won't leave Waterdeep then, because I would have to stop the game, and they want to play this game. And they're okay losing some of that agency, that choice that they have to go outside and, explore Faerun or the Sword Coast, right? They're okay losing that because they're rewarded with having a game prepared already for them so they can play this game right then and right now. Now to our last term for DMs, maybe the most important. It will hopefully save you from TPKing your players. Action economy. This term covers all available things you can do on your turn. Action, bonus action, movement, object, interaction, usually used in talking about maximizing your turn. This applies for your PCs and your monsters, so you have to think about this, right? If you have 4 low-level players, and if we go by CR, which is a joke, it says that 3 1/4 goblins are hard fight for these players. If we look at the monster economy, the monsters we see can move, can attack, pretty simple. Same as the low-level party. Pretty much doing an average of 5 damage to the players that they hit. So the action economy is pretty much even. For the PCs and the monsters, it's 4 versus 3 in the sense of actions that they can do. 4 attacks, 3 attacks. Now, if we look at the armored troglodyte, and if you throw in 3 armored trogs who are still a quarter CR, they have multi-attack. 1 at 3 attacks, averaging 4 damage, or 1 with 2 attacks, averaging 7 damage each hit. These trogs can also give the players disadvantage on attack rolls with bonus action to hide, and they have advantage on hide rolls. The action economy for every round now for the PCs versus monster is now 4 attacks like before versus 9 to 6 in favor of the monsters. And those 4 attacks that the players get are at disadvantage. So the players are also getting disadvantage on those 4 attack rolls, shifting the action economy even more into the favor of the monsters. Meaning, due to action economy, the new creatures create the players to have a great disadvantage in this fight. And what makes it a disadvantage isn't their CR, it's the action economy between the 2 groups. Like I said, CR's joke very much is a joke in this game. You got to pay attention to what the monsters can do. So make sure when you're creating encounters, you take a peek at the actions that the monsters can take. and make sure you look to see their special abilities, like the Trogs have, that have advantage on hide checks, making them so much more harder to hit versus the Goblins, right? Got to make sure the action economy is equal. Got it, or close to equal, right? Because it's saying that the two fights, Goblins versus players and Trogs versus players, are even. That's nowhere close. And you're going to TPK your players quite easily. So please let me know if you enjoyed these 5 terms that I believe you should know before running your campaign. And to my players looking at the lucky feat, I'm allowing it for sure. But if you close your eyes, I will say you crit fail 3 times in a row. And new DMs, at your table, maybe not do that and don't be such a dick. But my players, though,